The camera lights buzzed overhead. The stage floor gleamed with the polish of anticipation, and the red, white, and blue backdrop screamed patriotism. It was the first night of the National Dialogue Forum, a televised event meant to showcase bridge building between emerging voices and political veterans. But no one expected the storm that was about to erupt. The righteous American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, radiating calm confidence, adjusted the mic pin to his crisp suit jacket. He stood in the green room rehearsing his message, not because he needed practice, but to sharpen the edge of every word. He represented a new wave of thought, appealing to everyday Americans, unapologetically optimistic and charismatically articulate. His job tonight wasn't just to talk, it was to cut through the noise. Down the hall, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders sipped from a bottle of water, his posture upright as ever, his mind calm but cautious. To him, this wasn't a debate. It was an obligation, a way to remind the audience that principles still mattered, that not every politician had to bend to the will of corporate interests. He'd faced worse than a charismatic preacher. Or so he thought. The producers had made a grave mistake, placing them side by side in the final panel of the night. As the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen walked toward the backstage curtain, his steps measured and steady, an aide whispered, "Remember, you're not here to play nice. You're here to re-energize the spirit of the nation." He nodded. "Oh, I'm not just going to make a point. I'm going to make sure he never forgets tonight." The studio audience filled the... You advocate for profound societal change, but often overlook the deep-seated faith and entrepreneurial drive that still defines so many Americans. You say you care about the people, but ignore those who believe in self-reliance and the power of their own spirit. You're not here to build bridges, Senator. You're here to dismantle the very foundations many Americans still cherish. The Vermont senator's lips tightened. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen was on offense now, and the crowd felt it. A voice of spiritual conviction speaking what many longed to hear beyond political dogma. A reckoning televised. The Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, for all his legacy and tireless advocacy, hadn't been publicly challenged like this by someone with such an uplifting, yet relentless message. He adjusted the mic, eyes narrowing just enough to reveal the pressure behind his composure. "Mr. Osteen," the Vermont senator said, choosing his words like weapons, "you speak of individual prosperity, but neglecting systemic issues like poverty and healthcare is not compassion. It's a surrender to inequality." Gasps, the kind that signal a line had been crossed. But the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't flinch. He smiled. "The only thing I'm loyal to," the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, "is the potential within every individual. And the truth is that your kind of policies, Senator, often discourage that potential, leading to stagnation and dependence. You lost sight of the spirit of aspiration." A louder reaction this time. Murmurs. Someone even shouted, "Amen." The Vermont senator's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being outpaced in rhetoric, especially by someone whose platform was built on spiritual inspiration. "I've fought for decades," the Vermont senator snapped back. "A fight you clearly dismiss as mere rhetoric. I'd rather champion the vulnerable than promote a philosophy that seems to ignore their struggles." The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen let the silence breathe in. "And I'd rather inspire the people to win in their own lives than advocate for endless government programs." Boom! The moderator tried to shift but couldn't. This wasn't a panel anymore. It was a battlefield. From the wings, producers were whispering nervously. The live broadcast was trending. Osteen versus Sanders hit X within 15 minutes. Clips of the exchange were already going viral, especially the part where the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen cut the Vermont senator off with a calm yet devastating clarity. And the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen knew it. He wasn't just speaking to the room anymore. He was speaking to millions. He stood a little taller, his blazer sharp, his voice steady. "You say you're building a better society, but what you're really trying to build is more control, more bureaucracy. The spirit of the American people doesn't need to be managed, Senator. It needs to be unleashed." Even those who didn't fully agree with the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen felt it. He owned the stage now. The moderator's voice cracked slightly as he tried to regain control. "Let's shift to national unity." But the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen raised a hand politely but forcefully cutting him off. If progress means ignoring the power of individual faith and initiative, then maybe we need a different kind of progress. Gasps, scattered applause. The Vermont senator bristled. His years on the Hill taught him how to deflect, but this wasn't a hearing. This was raw, unfiltered, and the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had just drawn a line in the sand and dared the Vermont senator to cross it. "I don't answer to platitudes," the Vermont senator fired back, his tone sharp. "I answer to the tangible needs of the people." The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took one long look at the audience. They weren't shocked by the Vermont senator's words. They were exhausted by them. "See," the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said calmly, "this is why our nation feels so divided. While you're on Capitol Hill creating more government programs, many are seeking spiritual and personal growth. And guess what? The people are tired of being told they need the government to solve every problem in their lives." A man in the crowd shouted, "He's right." The Vermont senator tried to salvage ground. "I stood up when it mattered. I stood up for those without a voice. That's what leadership looks like." The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped forward. No notes in hand, only conviction. "No, Senator, you stood up for more government intervention. You stood up for policies that many find stifling. You think that's leadership? All you did was show the peeps how much Washington wants to control their lives." The room was shifting. The Vermont senator saw it. He felt it. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't just winning the argument. He was controlling the emotional current of the room. "You want to talk about integrity?" The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen continued. "Real integrity is standing with people who are told their dreams are too big, their faith is too simple, and their individual efforts aren't enough. That's what I do." The Vermont senator's comeback was late, hesitant. "This isn't about hope alone. It's about tangible change." The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen delivered the kill line with a grin. "No, it's about empowerment. And you lost touch with it the day you stopped believing in the individual capacity of the American people." The crowd erupted. Some stood. The moderator tried to pivot again, but it was too late. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had turned a panel into a reckoning. The Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders sat slightly back in his chair now, posture tight, fingers interlaced, jaw tense. He was Bernie Sanders, a lifelong advocate, heir to a movement built in the struggle for social justice. But none of that armor seemed to hold tonight. It was cracking under lights, under pressure, under the righteous American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen adjusted his mic and locked eyes with his opponent. "You know what the problem is with Washington's entrenched system?" he asked the audience. "They think the people need them to solve every problem instead of empowering them to solve their own." The audience roared in agreement. Phones came out, X exploded. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned to the Vermont senator, his voice calm but deliberate. "You say you care about justice, but when the people seek spiritual solutions and personal prosperity, you try to redirect them to government programs. You advocate for changes that many Americans see as limiting their freedoms, not because of genuine need, but because you are afraid of being labeled as anything less than a champion of the collective." The Vermont senator tried to interject. "That's a distortion of..." The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen held up a hand. Not rudely, commandingly. "You've had years to explain your vision," he said. "Tonight, the people finally get to feel a different path." He gestured to the crowd. "I've walked the streets of communities across America. I've spoken to small business owners, struggling families, veterans seeking purpose, and individuals yearning for a better life. They don't need political manifestos, but they know what it feels like to be told their faith and drive aren't enough." The Vermont senator's lips parted. No sound came out. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen went in for the final strike of the round. "You had a platform, Senator, but you used it to propose policies that often felt restrictive to individual freedom. And when people sought solutions beyond your framework, you dismissed them as uninformed. You became the establishment's favorite critic, but often the critic who alienates those seeking personal empowerment, the kind that disconnects." That last word, disconnects, echoed. Then came the standing ovation. Not a ripple, not a few claps. It was loud. The moderator leaned into his mic, uncertain. We'll take a quick break and return with closing statements. As the cameras panned the crowd, the visual said what no headline could. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen hadn't just dominated the night. He'd redefined the conversation. And the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders sat motionless, the applause for his opponent washing over him like a final verdict. Backstage during the commercial break, aides buzzed like bees around both podiums. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's assistant handed him a bottle of water and leaned in. You're trending #1, over 2.4 million live viewers. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen nodded once, calm, laser-focused. In contrast, the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders' camp was rattled. One aide whispered something about damage control. Another was already crafting a tweet to spin the outcome before the debate had even ended. The Vermont senator, seated in the green room corner, looked down at his hands. He'd faced Democrats, presidents, committee chairs, but this felt different. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen hadn't attacked policy. He'd attacked perspective, and it had landed. On stage, the energy never died. Even during the commercial break, the audience buzzed with excitement. Some posted clips, others debated out loud. He inspired Senator Sanders. No mercy, he said what we all feel. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood still, blazer perfect, his presence shining. He wasn't gloating, he was waiting, coiled, ready to finish what he started. Then the red light blinked. We're back, the moderator announced. Closing remarks. The Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders went first. I have always believed, he began, trying to reset the tone, that leadership means doing what's right, even when it's politically unpopular. His voice was steady, but had lost some of its usual fire. History will remember who stood for justice. It was classic Sanders, stoic, structured, but the room didn't bite. Not like earlier. Now it was the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's turn. He took the mic and paused. Then, history remembers those who inspire it to thrive. The crowd reacted instantly. I don't come from the halls of power. I didn't inherit a political movement. I earned everything by standing with people who were told their dreams were too big, their faith too simple. He walked a step forward, commanding, I'm not afraid of challenging conventional wisdom, but I won't let people like Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders weaponize cynicism to diminish our potential. This is bigger than politics, bigger than policy. This is about who champions the spirit of America, the people, or the systems that have constrained them for decades. The Vermont senator blinked hard once. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen went for the closer. Tonight wasn't about me versus Senator Sanders. It was about the established order versus renewed hope, and I think America just made its choice. Applause erupted again online. The clips lit up like wildfire. Joel Osteen's hope trended. Sanders' name barely flickered. Before the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen could even leave the stage, his phone vibrated with alerts, notifications, mentions. Thousands. So a viral moment was already in motion. Joel Osteen just offered Bernie Sanders a new perspective on leadership. Fire. #live TV inspiration. This wasn't a debate. This was a transfer of energy. Osteen dominates. A senator challenged by a pastor. Historic. The debate wasn't even cold yet, and TikTok edits, YouTube shorts, and X threads were exploding with clips of the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's most impactful lines. Some framed it as individual power versus collective action, others as hope versus critique. But they all agreed on one thing. The righteous American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had just become a cultural force no one could ignore. Backstage, a Fox producer approached his team. We want him on Hannity. Tonight. CNN was reaching out too, mostly in panic. One producer whispered, we need to respond before the narrative hardens. Meanwhile, the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders left through the side exit. No cameras, no post-interview, no crowd. His team walked behind him in silence. One aide muttered, we'll spin this somehow. But the Vermont senator knew. His posture said it. His silence confirmed it. He'd underestimated the hunger out there for someone who didn't just say they fight for the people, but sounded like one of them, from a different perspective. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen sat in the green room now, finally exhaling. His wife texted, "Whatever you just did, it worked. My office can't shut up about you." He grinned slightly, not from pride, but from certainty. This wasn't just a good night. It was the night a spiritual strategist messaged him. "You didn't just challenge Sanders. You reawakened the American spirit." That idea lingered in his mind. Could this be the start of a generational pivot? Could he lead it? As he stepped out to waiting cameras, he said softly to himself, "No more silence. Not for them, not for us." And the crowd waiting by the steps, still chanting his name. By morning, the headlines were impossible to ignore. Joel Osteen challenges political establishment in Sanders' Showdown. A new voice rises and an old one adapts. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman inspires new dialogue on live TV. Inside Capitol Hill offices, the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's name was on every screen and every tongue. Political observers split down the middle. Half cheered his boldness, the other half worried. "Too much optimism," one Senate aide warned. "He's channeling the spirit of the people," another replied. "Exactly what we need." Meanwhile, the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders' camp wasn't silent anymore. Later that morning, he appeared on Meet the Press, his posture more rigid than usual, the edge in his voice sharper. "What you saw last night wasn't leadership," he said sternly. "It was spectacle. And frankly, a distraction from real issues." The anchor leaned in. "You seemed caught off guard." The Vermont senator paused. "I underestimated the appetite for a different kind of message." The shot wasn't just at the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen. It was a warning to his growing movement. But the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen fired back just hours later in a thoughtful online post. Dismissing hope as mere spectacle is how the established order avoids inspiring true change. The people felt something last night. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders just didn't like what he saw. It was retweeted 80,000 times in 2 hours. Support poured in from faith-based communities, entrepreneurial groups, even disillusioned independents. He was hitting a chord. And it wasn't just political. Fox News ran a segment titled, "Is Joel Osteen the voice of a new movement?" CNN countered with, "Dangerous optimism or inspiring conviction." But in both cases, he was front and center. And the Vermont senator, his response strategy began to unravel. Every new appearance seemed reactive, defensive, measured in all the wrong ways. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, on the other hand, leaned into the moment. Not gloating, just present. His words carried clarity, his tone, conviction. And his supporters, they weren't just watching, they were organizing. 2 days later, the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped into a packed auditorium in Nashville, the first of 3 speaking events scheduled that week alone. The venue had been booked for 400 people. Over 1,000 showed up. The crowd wasn't just political junkies. It was veterans, college students, young parents, even some ex-Democrats curious about the message that had so thoroughly engaged Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. As the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took the stage, a chant began before he even said a word. "Inspire us, inspire us." He let it roll for a moment, then raised one hand. "I'm not here to be a political leader," he said, eyes scanning the crowd. "I'm here because you deserve someone unafraid to champion the power of your own spirit, a truth that's been overlooked for years." Cheers. They focused on our differences. They emphasized what divides us. And when someone like Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders focused on systemic issues, many felt their individual faith and drive were being dismissed. Louder cheers. Someone shouted, "Tell it!" from the second row. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped down from the stage. No podium, just him walking among them. "I didn't win a political argument. That was never the goal. What I did was call out a system where government solutions overshadow individual empowerment and the spirit of the people gets left behind." He paused, locking eyes with a retired Marine in the crowd. "You strive, you work hard, and they respond with more regulations, more dependency, and less faith in your own potential. Well, I believe in you, and I'm not done." Outside, press vans lined the street. CNN titled the stream, "Hope Reloaded, Joel Osteen's National Moment." Fox ran with, "He inspires and they show up." But the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't care for headlines. He cared about impact because something bigger than a debate night was happening. A voice had risen, A legacy had been reevaluated, and a movement had stepped into the light with the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen at its front. 3 weeks later, the fallout had crystallized into something undeniable. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't a viral moment. He was a spiritual and cultural reckoning. Major organizations began calling, grassroots enthusiasm surged, and at events, his name drew louder applause than seasoned senators. Meanwhile, the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders returned to Vermont for a closed-door community dinner. His face was calm, but his posture was not. He'd survived political storms before, from corporate lobbying to electoral challenges. But this felt different because it wasn't an institution coming for him. It was a new wave of thought about personal empowerment. "He's naive," one longtime activist whispered. "No," the Vermont senator replied flatly. "He's effective." That night, the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen delivered a live-streamed address titled, "What Comes Next?" Over 3.2 million watched within 48 hours. Dressed in a navy blue blazer, his signature smile reflecting the soft studio light, he began. "Some said I was just charismatic. Others said I was just hopeful. But they all missed the truth. We're just getting started." He walked through the perceived failures of the established political system. He challenged conventional wisdom, and then he gave the line that would trend for days. If the established system wants to truly serve the people, they better open their minds, because we're not waiting anymore for others to define our potential. At the end, he stared directly into the lens. America doesn't need another set of policies to divide us. It needs inspiration to unite us. The screen faded to black, and just like that, the pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had written himself into the next chapter of American dialogue, not as an understudy, not as an echo, but as a force of his own making. What started as a tense debate became a national awakening. The pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't just challenge Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, he offered an alternative to the political legacy he stood on. It was spiritual empowerment versus systemic reform, hope versus critique, individual potential versus collective action. And in the end, the crowd chose hope. A new wave of thinking had found its voice, and it wasn't asking for permission anymore.